There are 4 different ways to use your value proposition during a cold call. First, you can use your value proposition as your introduction. You can use your value proposition as a response to some very difficult and common objections. You can use your value proposition to build interest right before you go for the close. And you can also use it when you're going for the close. And I'm going to show you an example of how to use a value proposition in all 4 of these areas. But before I do that, I want to provide some tips that you can follow to create your value proposition. And to make it crystal clear what we're talking about here, a value proposition is basically answering the question of what's in it for me for the prospect. This is what your prospect cares most about. And when you go out there and send emails or talk to prospects on cold calls and you talk about the product that you sell and what it does, this does not answer the question of what's in it for me. This is basically sharing what your product does in terms of features and functionality. And to answer the question of what's in it for me, you need to share the improvements that your product can deliver, because how your product improves things for your prospect is why they should be interested in your product. And that's answers the question of what's in it for me. And the improvements that you deliver is the value that you have to offer. So your value proposition is not explaining what your product does. Your value proposition is explaining the improvements that your product can deliver. So to create your value proposition, we first have to stop to think about, okay, well, what are the improvements that my product delivers? And we actually have a full sales message brainstorming process that will help you to organize all the different things you should communicate with your prospects. But at the center of this process is actually brainstorming the value that you have to offer and the improvements that your product can deliver. And I'm not going to show you this process here today because I've actually done that in another video. I'll include a link to that in the description. But just to show you how that process helps you to create your value proposition, if we just skip ahead to that 3rd step of that process and going through this process for demonstration purposes using my own product, one thing we sell here at SalesScripter is the Smart Sales System. Now, it can actually be difficult to think about, well, I know what my product does, but I really don't know how it improves things. And by the way, your product can deliver different improvements to different audiences or different buyers. But here's a tool that you can use when thinking about your product and trying to think of improvements is here's an 8-point checklist that you can go through. Does your product help to make something work better? Help to make something easier? Help to decrease the time it takes to do something? Increase revenue or income? Decrease the prospect's costs or expenses? Improve the customer that you're selling to? Improve their product or the service that they deliver? Decrease the risk of something bad happening? Improve visibility or access to information for your customers. So you can go through this list thinking about your product, but here's something that might help is to think about the different features of your product and think about the different things that you'll do as part of your service. And what you can do is you can look at each item one by one and say, does that individual feature help to make something easier? And if it does, then you can use that to think of an improvement that you can deliver, and that can help you to create your value proposition. But as you're going through this list, you might want to think about the target audience that you're creating your cold call script for, the audience you're going to be cold calling, because that could impact the improvements that you create. You could create a tailored value proposition, and that could improve your ability to grab the prospect's attention and build interest. But for demo purposes, we're going to use a broad audience and general audience of businesses. But going through this checklist one at a time, I can come up with these benefits for the Smart Sales System. We will help businesses to get their reps generating more leads, help businesses to increase sales for every rep on the team, and help businesses to decrease sales staff turnover. So there's my value proposition right there. Now it's about how to incorporate that into my cold calling. So if we go back to this list, let's just go through this one at a time. And to show you these 4 different areas, I'm going to actually go back to our cold call process. We've talked about this in a lot of other videos. I'm not going to explain this process here because I've already done that in another video. I'll include a link to this in the description as well. If you're not familiar with our cold call process, you probably want to watch that other video. But let's start with how can you use your value proposition to improve your introduction? Well, if we go back to the cold call process, you might open the call. Hello, Tom. This is Michael Halper calling from SalesScripter. Have I caught you in the middle of anything? At which point Tom might say, I'm fine. What do you got? And then I progress to sharing the purpose for the call. Now, if you were to honestly share the purpose for your call, you might say something like, well, I'm calling to introduce myself and my company. I'd like to schedule a meeting or appointment with you. I want to learn more about what your needs are. I want to share details about what we offer. And ultimately, the purpose for your call might be to sell your product. Now, I'd recommend you don't say any of those as the purpose for your call, because any of these will make you sound like a salesperson that's trying to sell something, at which point you're going to trigger guardedness on the prospect side, and you're likely to face objections there shortly after. So what we can do is prevent ourselves from sharing any of those and replace that with our value proposition as the reason why we're calling, which is actually logical. If you deliver these improvements to other customers or other businesses, you are calling them to see if they need the improvements that you have to offer. And you might share that by saying something like, well, great, the reason for my call is we help businesses to get their reps generating more leads and increase sales for every rep on the team. After you share your value proposition, then the next step in the cold call process is to do a soft sales takeaway, which you might share something like this. But I don't know if you want to improve those areas, and that's why I'm reaching out with a question or two. And moving on to the next way is for objection responses. And I'm actually going to go back to the opening of the call, because when I asked if I had caught Tom in the middle of anything, I might get an objection at that point. Two common objections that you face at that point are, well, what is this call in regards to, or is this a sales call? If you get either of those objections, your direct and honest answer might be, well, the call is regarding I'm trying to introduce myself, or I'm trying to schedule a meeting, that same list that I showed you before. And if you answer with anything like that, you're going to face resistance and objections and get shut down. But we recommend you don't mislead the prospect in any way. So what you can do here is you can share your value proposition as sort of a deflection. You're not necessarily saying, I'm calling to sell you anything, and you're also not being misleading. And what that might look like is Tom says, well, what is this in regards to? Well, the reason for my call is we help businesses to get their reps generating more leads and increase sales for every rep on the team. So what I'm doing there is I'm sharing the improvements that I deliver as the reason for my call, which is not necessarily being completely clear, but it's also not being dishonest or misleading. And what this can do is this can keep you alive. When you get the what's this in regards to, you're very close to being shut down, and this keeps you alive, and at which point the prospect may ask you another question, or you might establish the call thereafter. All right, and the third way that we can use this is to build interest. So if I go back to that cold call script, towards the end of the cold call is when we recommend you try to focus on building interest with the prospect. And you might do that by sharing what we refer to as your product building block. And that might look something like this after you've asked some questions. Well, based on what you shared, it might make sense to talk more, because we actually have a solution called the Smart Sales System, and it includes this and that. And what the Smart Sales System does is it helps businesses to get their reps generating more leads and increase sales for every rep on the team. And so just to highlight what's there in case you missed it, in the middle of the product building block in our building interest content is our value proposition. So we're just coming back to it at the end of the cold call. And the fourth way that we can use our value proposition is when we're closing. So if we go to the last step of the cold call process is when we go for the close, and hopefully at this point we've found a reason to talk more, we built a little bit of interest, and now we're going for the close. But I've called you out of the blue. I'm not sure if this is the best time to talk about this. Are you available for a brief call where we can learn more about you and share some examples of how we've helped businesses to get their reps generating more leads? And just to highlight again, in the middle there is our value proposition in case you missed that. So one thing you may be thinking now is that we're repeating ourselves a lot. So you have some options here. I'm showing you 4 different ways that you can use your value proposition, and you could pick one of those, or you may use it at multiple times. You may repeat yourself, and that's just fine. It's not a bad thing to be repeating your value proposition, I can tell you that. But one way this may go is you share a value point or two at the front end of the call, and then you expand on those thoughts towards the end of the call. So hopefully you can see there how impactful having a good value proposition can be on your cold calls and on your cold call script. And I just want to point out one thing if you didn't notice it. What we did here is we created one thing, which is our value proposition, and that allowed us to use that in multiple ways at multiple times. And that's actually how Sales Scripter works, and that's where the idea for Sales Scripter came from, is that I realized if I have a set of value points and a set of pain points and a set of questions to ask, I can mix and match those sets, or what I refer to now as building blocks. I can mix and match those to create a lot of different sales tools, such as cold call scripts and email messages and whatnot. And so that's the foundation and the logic of how Sales Scripter works. And Sales Scripter has the sales message builder area here, which takes you through that sales message brainstorming process step by step. with the second step here being a place for you to organize and brainstorm the different benefits that your product can deliver to your target audience. And once you go through that process, then the software has a library of documents such as sales scripts and emails and voicemails. And all of these documents basically mix and match those bullet points and those blocks to create all of these different documents. So just to show you real quick, like this cold call script value intro by, that's one of the ways that I just shared with you using your value proposition. This is an example of a script in SalesScripter, and it basically how the software uses those bullet points as your value intro. Over here, your objection responses, and here the what is this in regards to. Here the software basically inserts what I just showed you. In the product area, you have your benefits here. In the close, you have your benefits here. So hopefully at a minimum, those tips giving you some ideas of how to improve your cold calls. If you really want to take that to the next level, you may want to check out SalesScripter and use it to create your sales message, and then allow the software to create all of your different documents and then use those when you're cold calling. But that is pretty much it for this video. I hope that was helpful to you. Thanks for being here. If you want more information or more tips, the best place to go is salescripter.com. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you on the next video. Have a great day. Take care. Bye.